Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Story Sleeper. Tonight, we're bringing you a dreamy retelling of the timeless fairy tale Cinderella. Before we drift into the magic, I'd love to know where you listening from and what time is it for you right now. Don't forget to subscribe and be part of our cozy, sleepy community. The night had grown long in the village, so long that no one remembered when it had truly begun. The great clock in the square stood forever at 1 minute past midnight, its brass hands frozen in place as if caught in a spell of ice. The chimes had fallen silent years ago, though no one could recall the last note they had heard. The sky hung in a deep, unbroken indigo, never quite shifting to the paler shades of dawn, nor sinking into the black depths of full night. The air held a crisp stillness, touched with the faint tang of wood smoke. It was the kind of night that made time feel like it had stopped entirely, though the people of the village moved through their days as though this endless midnight were perfectly natural. At the far edge of the village, where the cobblestones surrendered to a winding dirt path that led into the forest, stood an old manor house. Its roof sagged under the weight of years, and its tall windows were clouded with a misting of age. Once, gardens had bloomed there, roses and foxgloves, herbs with silver-green leaves, and even pear trees heavy with fruit in summer. Now, brambles crowded the garden wall, and moss crept up the stones like a slow, determined tide. Inside, the rooms were large but dim, their once bright tapestries dulled with dust. In the largest room, where the hearth yawned wide and deep, sat Ella. She was known to most as Cinderella, though she had never quite minded the name. Her skin was pale, touched with the faint glow of firelight, and her hair was the color of warm honey under a cloudy sky. She wore a dress of plain gray, the sleeves a little frayed from years of work. She spent most hours by the hearth. The fire never fully burned out. It dimmed to embers at times, but there was always a glow deep in the ashes, ready to flare up when coaxed. Every night, she gathered the ashes into a shallow silver basin. The basin was old, its edges worn smooth, and though it had lost its shine, she treated it as one might a treasure. The others in the house, her stepmother and two stepsisters, spoke little to her. Their silences were pointed, but never cruel in the dramatic sense. They didn't shout or strike. They simply looked through her, as though she were nothing more than a draft passing through a room. Their conversations fluttered with idle talk. Who had worn what at which gathering, which neighbor had fallen ill, how the tailor's son had made a fool of himself. None of it seemed to belong to the world Cinderella lived in, the one of embers and dust, of quiet and shadow. It was the ash that spoke to her. When the night was still and the house held its breath, she would hear it, soft murmurs like voices drifting up from a deep place. She could never quite catch the words, but the cadence felt familiar, as though the ashes carried echoes of things she had once known. Sometimes she thought she saw shapes in them, a tower's silhouette, a forest path, a delicate bridge spanning a river of mist. If she blinked, the shapes would scatter into dull gray dust again. One evening, after sweeping the hearth, she glanced toward the frost-dusted window. Beyond the tangled garden, the forest seemed to press closer than before, the trees leaning toward the house in a strange, attentive way. Between two trunks, far back in the shadowed wood, a pale light moved, steady and slow, not flickering like a lantern. It floated for a moment, as if watching her before fading into the mist. She said nothing about it at supper. The stepmother spoke idly about a merchant's daughter in the next town, who had married well. The sisters discussed a rumor of a grand event at the castle, though no one in the village had been invited in years. Cinderella ate in silence, listening to the faint crackle from the kitchen hearth. That night, as she poured the ashes into the basin, she noticed the fire's glow was different, cooler somehow, with a faint bluish cast. When she leaned closer, she saw the surface of the ashes shift in a slow swirl. A shape emerged, a curve of road beneath bare trees, leading toward a lightless horizon. She watched, breath held, as the image dissolved again into dust. Outside, the air stirred. The old shutters trembled faintly, though there was no true wind. Somewhere in the forest, something moved, not quickly, but with a patience that felt both unsettling and inevitable. The flickering firelight cast long shadows across the worn wooden floor, shifting gently as the embers breathed their quiet life into the hearth. Cinderella's eyes lingered on the basin cradling the ash, a delicate mist rising from the surface, as if the ashes themselves exhaled secrets into the stillness. She set the basin carefully on the low table beside her chair, brushing her hands together to clear the fine dust. The weight of the silence in the house pressed down, yet it was not oppressive. It was more like a pause, a breath held deep in the lungs of the world before the next whispered word. Her stepsisters passed through the room, their gowns whispering like dry leaves, pale faces turned away as if to avoid her altogether. The eldest sister, Lilith, stopped at the doorway, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly before she swept past without a word. The younger, Marin, glanced briefly, her lips twitching in a faint, unreadable expression. Cinderella did not flinch. Years of invisible walls had made her steady in their presence. Instead, she rose quietly and moved toward the window. Outside, the garden was a tangle of shadows and frost-kissed branches, the faint outline of the pear tree barely visible through the gloom. A distant owl hooted softly, its call like a lullaby for the night. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep through the pane and settle against her skin. Somewhere beyond the garden, the forest waited, vast, secretive, and timeless. The air seemed to hum, the low vibration settling into her bones. A voice, if one could call it that, seemed to rise from the earth itself, a murmur carried on the breath of the trees. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her as though the forest were speaking directly to her. When she opened them again, the silver basin gleamed faintly in the firelight, as if it held a shard of the moon itself. The ash stirred once more, a slow, deliberate dance of dust and shadow. Tonight was not like other nights. She could feel it in the way the air folded around her, in the tension beneath the quiet. Turning away from the window, Cinderella made her way to the small chamber she called her own. It was a corner of the manor that even the others rarely visited, filled with faded linens and a single wooden chest. She opened it carefully, revealing a simple collection of items: a worn leather-bound book, a small wooden box with delicate carvings, and a piece of cloth folded neatly. A gown of soft gray silk, worn and faded. She touched the fabric lightly, feeling the smoothness beneath her fingers, remembering the stories her mother had told her long ago, before the shadows had settled over the house. Stories of light and darkness, of magic woven into the very ashes of their hearth. She set the gown aside and opened the leather book. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, written in a delicate hand. The words spoke of guardianship and time, of fires that held the past and future in their glowing hearts. A sudden knock at the door startled her. She closed the book quickly and moved to open it. Outside stood a figure cloaked in deep midnight blue, their face hidden beneath a hood. The messenger from the castle. In their hand was a sealed scroll, heavy with wax and bearing the royal crest, a rose entwined with a silver thorn. Without a word, the figure extended the scroll. Cinderella took it, the paper cool and strangely alive beneath her fingers. As she broke the seal, a faint shimmer rose from the parchment, and the words written there seemed to glow softly in the dim light. "You are invited," the message read, "to the Winter's Eve ball, where the fate of the kingdom shall be decided." The messenger bowed once, then vanished into the night as silently as they had come. Cinderella stood alone in the quiet room, the scroll still warm in her hands. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of frost and distant pine. The hearth fire flickered, and then, unexpectedly flared bright blue for a single breath before settling once more. She looked down at the silver basin. The ashes swirled faster now, taking shape. An elegant carriage pulled by creatures of mist, a gown woven from moonbeams, and a path that wound through the dark forest toward a tall, glowing castle. Her heart beat slowly, a calm rhythm that matched the pulse of the night. The night was deep, the air still, and the journey ahead whispered like a secret waiting to be told. The following days passed like soft shadows sliding across the walls of the old manor. The village remained wrapped in its endless midnight, where time seemed to fold gently upon itself, and the people went about their lives as if caught in a dream they could neither wake from nor fully remember. Cinderella moved with quiet grace, her thoughts heavy with the scroll's mysterious summons. She still held the delicate parchment carefully folded within the folds of her dress, feeling its faint warmth like a pulse against her skin. Her stepmother and stepsisters continued their cold routine, but even their whispered conversation slowed when they noticed the change in her, the subtle shift of something old and new woven together like threads of silver and ash. Each night she returned to the hearth to tend the fire and gather the ashes, watching the fine dust rise like a ghostly mist in the candlelight. The whispers grew clearer, the shadows in the ash forming shapes she had never seen before. A path lined with flickering lanterns, a garden of frozen roses, and, most haunting of all, a clock whose hands moved backward into the dark. One evening, as the wind moaned softly beyond the cracked window panes, she wrapped herself in a cloak of deep midnight blue and stepped outside. The cold kissed her cheeks, and the ground beneath her feet was hard and unyielding, dusted with frost that shimmered faintly under the ghostly light. She walked toward the edge of the garden, past the tangled brambles and broken stone, until the forest loomed before her like a dark sea. The trees swayed gently, though the air was still, and the branches whispered in a language older than words. A soft glow pulsed among the trees, guiding her forward along a narrow path carved from the shadow. The farther she walked, the quieter the world became, as if the forest held its breath in reverence. At the path's end stood a figure bathed in pale moonlight, tall and slender, cloaked in silver and frost, with eyes that held the depth of endless winter nights. They reached out a hand, delicate and cold, inviting her to follow. Without hesitation, Cinderella took the hand, feeling a shiver run through her as the forest seemed to shift and bend around them. The ground beneath them softened to moss and mist, and the air grew thick with the scent of pine and ancient earth. Together they moved through the woods in silence, the glow from the figure's touch illuminating the way with a gentle radiance that never flickered or waned. As they walked, she glimpsed glimpses of forgotten things, a broken crown half buried in snow, a shattered mirror reflecting a pale moon, and distant echoes of laughter carried on the wind. The journey felt endless, yet somehow she did not tire. At last, the trees parted, revealing a wide clearing where a grand carriage awaited, a coach of gleaming silver and glass, drawn by creatures that seemed spun from mist and shadow. The figure gestured toward the carriage, and Cinderella stepped inside, the air warm and scented with faint notes of lavender and cedar. The doors closed softly behind her, and the carriage began its slow, graceful journey toward the castle she had seen only in dreams. Outside, the forest slipped past like a shifting tapestry, shadows and light weaving a quiet story of night and silence. The world beyond the carriage window was a blur of twilight and frost, and somewhere deep within the feeling of destiny stirred, a gentle calling that tugged at the edges of her heart. The carriage moved slowly through the silent night, its wheels tracing soft echoes against the frost-hardened path. Outside, the forest's shadows lengthened and curled like whispered secrets, the trees leaning close as if to listen to the quiet passage of time itself. Inside, Cinderella sat wrapped in the soft folds of her cloak, the silver basin of ash resting on her lap. Her fingers brushed over its cool surface, feeling the faint warmth that pulsed beneath the dust. The whispers she had come to know drifted around her, weaving a tapestry of murmurs and half-remembered dreams. The figure who had guided her now sat opposite, still cloaked in silver frost, their face half hidden beneath a hood. They spoke not a word, but their presence was a steady beacon in the dimness, a quiet light that seemed to hold the night at bay. As the carriage wound its way toward the distant castle, Cinderella's thoughts drifted like leaves on a slow stream. She remembered the stories her mother had told her when she was small, tales of fires that held the memory of stars, of magic woven into the ashes of a dying hearth, and of a timekeeper's promise bound in smoke and flame. The castle rose before them like a vision carved from ice and moonlight, its tall towers piercing the sky wrapped in a delicate frost that shimmered like 1,000 diamonds. The windows glowed faintly, casting pools of warm light into the cold night. At the gate, 2 silent guards stood motionless, their armor gleaming beneath the pale stars. The carriage came to a gentle stop, and the doors opened with a soft sigh. Cinderella stepped out, her feet touching the frosted stones of the courtyard. The air was crisp and still, filled with the scent of winter blooms and distant pine. She glanced up at the great clock tower rising above the castle walls. The hands were frozen at 1 minute past midnight, the same as the village clock, a symbol of a time suspended, waiting. The grand hall awaited, vast and silent, draped in silks of silver and blue. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting a soft glow that danced upon the marble floors. The guests moved like shadows, their faces masked in delicate lace, their voices low and melodic. At the far end of the hall stood the prince, tall and regal, his eyes deep pools of twilight. He watched her arrival with a knowing calm, as if expecting her all along. He stepped forward, his voice a quiet murmur that carried through the hall like a gentle breeze. "Welcome, keeper of the ashes. Tonight, the night awaits its guardian." Cinderella felt the weight of his words settle over her like a cloak, heavy yet comforting. The music began, slow and haunting, a melody woven from the sighs of the wind and the distant call of night birds. Couples began to move across the floor, their steps soft and measured, tracing patterns as ancient as time itself. She watched, breath steady, as the dance unfolded, a ritual both beautiful and solemn. The hours slipped by like droplets of midnight dew, and the clock tower remained still. At the stroke of the hour, though no chime rang, Cinderella felt a gentle tug within her, a pull toward the hearth and the silver basin waiting for her return. She knew the night was not yet over, and the journey still stretched before her. The dance in the grand hall faded into a soft murmur as Cinderella's thoughts began to drift, carried away on the currents of the night's gentle spell. The guests moved like whispers, their forms blurring at the edges like shadows in a dream, while the prince's gaze lingered with quiet expectation. Her mind wandered back to the hearth, to the silver basin filled with ashes that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. She could almost hear their faint murmur, calling to her across the miles, weaving a thread of light through the endless night. With careful steps, she excused herself from the swirling figures and slipped through the side corridors of the castle, where the air was cooler and heavy with the scent of ancient stone. The walls held secrets, faint traces of forgotten laughter, echoes of footsteps long since past, and the gentle hum of time itself. The corridors twisted and curved like the branches of the forest outside, leading her toward a quiet chamber bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, filtering through stained glass. There, a single fireplace glowed faintly, its embers shimmering with an ethereal light. She approached and knelt before the hearth, the silver basin cradled carefully in her hands. The ashes within stirred softly, forming shapes she recognized: a delicate slipper, a winding path, a crown half hidden in shadow. Her fingers brushed the ashes lightly, and a warmth spread through her palms, seeping into her very bones. It was a warmth that spoke of old magic, of promises made and kept beneath the watchful gaze of stars long extinguished. Outside, the world was still, a vast expanse of midnight and frost. The clock tower loomed silently, its hands forever paused, guarding the secret of time held captive. Suddenly, a faint sound stirred in the distance, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps echoing on stone. Cinderella rose, eyes searching the darkness beyond the window. From the shadowed courtyard, a figure emerged, clad in deep midnight blue, face obscured beneath a hood. The figure moved with deliberate grace, as if carrying the weight of countless nights in their stride. Without a word, the figure extended a hand, offering a small, intricately carved box. Cinderella accepted it, the wood smooth and warm beneath her fingers. She opened the box to reveal a single delicate slipper, a perfect fit, yet unlike any she had seen before. It shimmered with the soft glow of embers, its surface alive with the flicker of firelight. A voice, barely more than a whisper, seemed to rise from the box itself, carrying a promise both solemn and profound. To claim the night, you must first embrace the ashes. The figure bowed, then retreated silently into the shadows, leaving Cinderella alone with the quiet fire and the glowing slipper. She cradled it close, feeling the weight of destiny settle around her like a cloak woven from smoke and moonbeams. The night stretched on, endless and deep, and the hearth whispered softly as the ashes danced beneath the fading embers. The hours slipped past like threads of silver, weaving through the fabric of night. Cinderella remained by the hearth, the delicate ember slipper resting gently in her lap, its glow pulsing softly in the quiet room. Outside, the forest stood still beneath the weight of frost, its ancient branches reaching skyward like silent sentinels guarding the endless midnight. She rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the shadowed garden where the brambles curled like sleeping serpents. The moon, pale and distant, cast a cold light that made the frost sparkle like diamonds scattered across the earth. Her thoughts drifted to the coming night, to the promise whispered in the ash and fire, a journey not only of distance but of time itself. The scroll's words echoed softly in her mind, where the fate of the kingdom is decided and the clock's hands stand still. A gentle breeze stirred the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and smoke. She wrapped herself in the cloak of deep midnight blue once more and stepped outside, the cold biting but not cruel against her skin. The path through the garden lay clear, marked by faint footprints traced in frost. The forest beyond awaited, its dark heart pulsing with secrets. As she walked, the air shimmered with quiet magic. The trees seemed to lean closer, their whispers growing into a soft chorus that wrapped around her like a lullaby. Ahead, the silver carriage awaited, its glass gleaming faintly under the moon's watchful eye. She climbed inside, the warmth of the cabin a gentle contrast to the chill beyond. The silent coachman took his place at the reins, a shadowy figure whose presence was both comforting and enigmatic. The journey through the mist-wrapped forest began anew, slow and deliberate. The trees blurred past like ancient memories, and the world beyond the carriage window dissolved into a dreamscape of shadows and light. Inside, Cinderella held the glowing slipper close, feeling the pulse of its fire echo through her veins. The night stretched ahead, full of promise and quiet power. And so, the house of ash faded behind her, wrapped once again in the stillness of endless midnight, as she journeyed toward the fate that awaited in the frozen castle of time. The dawn never came, yet the castle stirred as if awakening from a deep dream. Within its frost-lined walls, the echoes of footsteps echoed softly, footsteps that carried with them the weight of long-forgotten promises. Cinderella found herself standing in a quiet chamber, the silver basin of ash set carefully beside the hearth. The soft glow of embers painted the room in hues of twilight, the shadows stretching and folding like whispered secrets. Her fingers traced the delicate scroll she had received, a summons sealed with the royal crest, heavy with the promise of things yet to unfold. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, the ink shimmering faintly beneath her touch. She had read the invitation countless times, each reading unveiling new layers of meaning hidden beneath the elegant script. To the Winter's Eve ball, where the fate of the kingdom shall be decided. The phrase lingered in her mind, a gentle refrain that echoed through the silent halls. The air was thick with anticipation, yet calmness flowed through her like a slow, steady river. This was no ordinary gathering. It was a night bound by magic older than the castle itself, a night when time itself held its breath. As the flickering candlelight danced across the walls, the manor's silence was broken by the soft arrival of a messenger, one whose eyes held the quiet depth of endless night. Cloaked in a robe of deepest indigo, he carried an air of solemn purpose as he entered without a word. From beneath his cloak, he produced a delicate silver envelope, its edges etched with intricate patterns of frost and flame. He placed it gently before Cinderella, a silent invitation to step further into the mystery that awaited. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cool surface, feeling a surge of warmth that contrasted with the chill that lingered in the room. The seal broke with a soft snap, revealing a folded map, its lines glowing faintly in the candlelight. The map traced a path through the forest, winding and twisted, marked by symbols she recognized from the stories her mother had told. Each mark was a key, a step along the journey toward the heart of the night. Her gaze lifted to the window, where the forest stood still beneath the heavy skin. The path beckoned to her like a thread of silver, woven through the darkness, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the world was silent except for the distant call of an owl, its voice carrying the weight of countless nights. The village lay blanketed in frost, its streets empty save for the slow dance of falling ash from the hearth fires scattered among the houses. Cinderella rolled the map carefully and tucked it into the folds of her cloak. She felt the pull of the ashes in her basin, their whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if urging her onward. The night held its breath, waiting for her to take the first step. The shadows in the chamber seemed to deepen as Cinderella gathered her things, a soft rustle of fabric, the only sound breaking the stillness. The silver basin of ash rested like a quiet companion beside the hearth, its surface swirling gently as if alive with 1,000 whispered hopes. She wrapped the map and the delicate scroll carefully within her cloak, the fabric cool against her skin. Each fold seemed to pulse with the weight of the journey ahead, a slow rhythm that matched the beating of her heart. The castle's halls stretched before her, long corridors lined with ancient tapestries depicting forgotten legends and the slow dance of seasons past. Her footsteps echoed softly on the stone, a gentle cadence in the vastness of the night. Outside, the wind was still, but the forest beyond the walls seemed to breathe, leaves whispering secrets just beyond the reach of hearing. The moonlight filtered through the tall windows, casting pale patterns that flickered like gentle flames. Cinderella paused at a large arched window, gazing out toward the shadowed woods. The path marked on her map wound through the trees, a silver thread gleaming faintly in the darkness. She imagined the quiet rustle of branches, the soft crunch of frost beneath her feet. As she turned away from the window, a soft sound caught her attention. A low, rhythmic tapping coming from the corridor behind her. She moved quietly toward the sound, curiosity guiding her steps. At the end of the hall stood a figure cloaked in deep midnight blue, their face hidden beneath a hood that shimmered faintly with frost. In their gloved hand, they held a small, ornate lantern that glowed with a pale, steady light. Without a word, the figure beckoned, extending the lantern toward Cinderella as an invitation. She stepped forward, feeling the gentle warmth emanating from the light, and took the lantern in her hands. The flame inside flickered softly, cast in dancing shadows on the walls as the figure turned and began to lead the way. Cinderella followed, her steps quiet and measured as they moved deeper into the heart of the castle. The corridors gave way to a spiral staircase, winding downward into the cool silence of the castle's depths. The air grew cooler, scented faintly with earth and ancient stone. The light of the lantern flickered against the walls, revealing carvings of stars and swirling smoke. At the base of the stairs, the figure paused before a heavy wooden door carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the lantern's light. With a gentle push, the door opened to reveal a small chamber filled with shelves of ancient tomes, bottles of shimmering powders, and scrolls sealed with wax. In the center of the room stood a table draped in velvet, upon which rested a single silver box. The figure gestured toward it, and Cinderella approached with a mixture of wonder and reverence. She lifted the lid of the box slowly, revealing a delicate necklace woven from threads of silver and ash, its pendant shaped like a tiny clock face frozen at midnight. The surface shimmered softly, as though alive with quiet magic. A voice, barely more than a whisper, seemed to rise from the pendant itself. To walk the path of time, you must carry its mark. Cinderella fastened the necklace around her neck, feeling its cool weight settle against her heart. The flame in the lantern glowed brighter for a moment, then softened once more. With the lantern lighting her way, she and the cloaked figure retraced their steps back up the spiral staircase, each step echoing softly in the stillness. Back in the grand hall, the guests had begun to gather near the entrance, their masked faces turning toward her as she reappeared. The prince awaited with a serene smile, his eyes holding the quiet depth of stars long vanished. He stepped forward, bowing with graceful ease. "The night is yours to begin," he said softly. "Walk the path laid before you, and the fate of all shall unfold." Cinderella nodded, her heart steady beneath the weight of destiny and quiet hope. The ash in the basin shimmered faintly, as though ready to guide her onward. Outside, the clock tower stood still, its hands forever marking the moment when time paused to breathe. The hall seemed to hold its breath as Cinderella stepped forward, the soft rustle of her cloak mingling with the faint murmur of voices wrapped in silken shadows. The silver basin rested quietly at her side, its ashes glowing faintly beneath the flickering candlelight, like embers waiting to be stirred to life. The prince's eyes met hers with a calm certainty, a steady beacon in the sea of masked faces that surrounded them. Without another word, he extended his hand, inviting her into the dance that had begun like a slow, unfolding flower in the moonlight. Their steps traced gentle arcs across the marble floor, each movement measured and deliberate, as if they were weaving a spell that held the night itself captive. The music rose and fell like the whisper of a distant breeze, notes drifting softly through the vast chamber, wrapping around them like a silken thread. As they danced, Cinderella felt the world slip away. The cold stone walls, the glittering masks, the endless night outside, replaced by a quiet stillness that settled deep within her bones. It was a silence filled not with emptiness, but with the presence of something old and wise, like the breath of the stars themselves. The prince's gaze never wavered, his voice a gentle murmur when he finally spoke. "The night holds many secrets, and not all are meant to be seen at once. Trust in the ashes, for they remember what the world forgets." She nodded, the words sinking into her like a soft rain on dry earth. The ash in the basin stirred once more, shapes forming and dissolving in a slow dance of shadow and light. A winding path, a silver key, a clock whose hands moved with silent purpose. As the dance continued, the guests around them seemed to blur, faces melting into masks of mist and moonlight. Time lost meaning, stretched thin like gossamer threads caught in the breeze. Then, just as the music reached its quietest note, the great clock in the tower chimed. Though no sound escaped the still air, the moment echoed in their minds like a secret kept between old friends. Cinderella's gaze drifted upward, meeting the frozen hands of the clock, 1 minute past midnight, still and unwavering. The prince's voice was barely a whisper. The clock moves again, so too shall the fate of the night be revealed. The dance slowed, the music fading into the soft sigh of night wind slipping through open windows. The guests melted into the shadows, leaving Cinderella and the prince alone in the vast hall. A gentle breeze swept through, carrying the scent of frost and pine, wrapping around them like a whispered promise. The prince stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. The path is yours to walk now. Follow the ashes, and all will be revealed. Cinderella felt the basin grow warm in her hands, the ashes swirling in anticipation, ready to guide her through the mysteries ahead. The night stretched before her, a tapestry of shadow and light, of secrets waiting to unfold beneath the frozen stars. Cinderella stood in the quiet aftermath of the dance, the soft glow from the hearth flickering against the walls like gentle pulses of a heartbeat. The guests had vanished into the shadowed corners of the castle, their laughter and whispers folding into the silent folds of night. She clutched the silver basin tightly, feeling the warm hum of the ashes beneath her fingertips, a slow, steady rhythm like the breathing of the earth itself. The shapes within the ash shifted, revealing a path winding through dense forest, a shimmering veil of mist, and a faint outline of a doorway framed in frost. The prince's words echoed in her mind. Follow the ashes, and all will be revealed. She folded the basin close and stepped toward the heavy oak doors that led beyond the great hall. The corridor outside was lined with ancient tapestries, their threads faded but still vibrant in the soft candlelight. The images told stories of kings and queens, of battles fought beneath strange skies, and of guardians who watched over the passage of time. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved deeper into the castle, the air growing cooler and tinged with the scent of aged wood and stone. The distant murmur of the forest seemed to call to her, a quiet song weaving through the stillness. She came to a narrow staircase spiraling downward, its steps worn smooth by centuries of careful feet. At the base, a small wooden door stood closed, carved with delicate patterns of vines and stars. Cinderella's hand hovered over the latch, feeling the cool metal beneath her palm. The door creaked open with a slow, measured sigh, revealing a chamber bathed in pale blue light. Inside, shelves lined the walls, filled with glass jars containing powders that shimmered like starlight, scrolls tied with silver ribbons, and ancient books bound in leather. In the center stood a pedestal supporting an open tome, its pages glowing faintly. The text shifted and flowed like liquid ink, telling of time's endless dance and the secret keepers who guarded its flow. A chill settled over her, but it was not a cold to fear. Rather, it was the quiet weight of destiny settling gently upon her shoulders. As she approached the pedestal, the ashes in her basin began to rise in a swirling mist, wrapping around her like a soft cloak. The words in the tome shifted to reveal a single phrase: to hold the past and future, one must first embrace the present. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glowing page. A warm light spread from the book, filling the chamber with a gentle radiance. Suddenly, the door behind her closed softly, and the room was plunged into a peaceful darkness, save for the soft glow from the ashes in the book. In the silence, a voice spoke, soft and steady, like the turning of ancient pages. Your journey has begun, keeper of the ashes. The path will wind through shadow and light, but your heart will guide you true. Cinderella closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep. When she opened them again, the chamber was empty. The book and the ashes vanished, leaving only the quiet stillness. The door creaked open once more, and a soft breeze carried the scent of frost and pine. She stepped out into the corridor, her steps steady and sure, ready to follow the path the ashes would lead her on. The corridor stretched before her, silent and endless, the flicker of candlelight casting soft shadows that danced like gentle spirits along the stone walls. Cinderella's breath was calm and steady, her steps light yet purposeful as she moved through the heart of the ancient castle. The silver basin of ashes rested lightly in her hands, its surface shimmering faintly with an inner light, a quiet pulse like the rhythm of the night itself. The ashes swirled slowly, drawing delicate patterns that seemed to breathe beneath her gaze, winding paths, misted forests, and gateways veiled in frost. A sudden whisper brushed against her ear, a voice soft as twilight, carrying promises woven of memory and dreams. The journey is yours to claim, through shadows that dance and light that sings. Trust in the ashes, they hold what time forgets. Outside, the world beyond the castle walls remained locked in perpetual midnight, the sky of a tapestry of deep indigo and silver stars, cold and distant, yet alive with silent watchfulness. Ahead, the path beckoned, a thread of silver woven through the darkness, waiting to be followed. As she stepped forward, the heavy oak doors of the castle opened silently before her, revealing the forest beyond, vast and still beneath its cloak of frost. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and distant fires. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching toward the sky, their roots deep in the earth's slow heartbeat. Cinderella took a deep breath, the cold filling her lungs like a quiet song, and stepped. The threshold. Behind her, the castle doors closed softly, sealing the mysteries within for the night. The path ahead was hers to walk, winding through shadow and light, through memory and time. And the ashes in her basin glowed softly, steady beacon in the endless midnight, guiding her toward what was yet to come. The path wound deeper into the forest, each step carrying Cinderella further from the familiar world of the cinder-strewn hearth. She walked slowly, the soft crunch of frost underfoot becoming a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat that belonged not to her, but to the woods themselves. The moon hung low, vast and pale, its light washing over the snow in a silver haze. Shadows stretched long between the trees, their edges softened by the quiet fog that threaded the air. The forest seemed both endless and intimate, as though it had been waiting for her arrival for centuries. She carried the basin of ashes carefully, the silvery dust shifting and curling inside it. Every so often, a faint spark flared from within, not harsh or bright, but like a breath of starlight caught in the dark. Cinderella's mind wandered as she walked. The cold air sharpened her senses, but her thoughts were adrift, pulled between the quiet peace of the forest and the strange whisper she had heard in the castle corridor. Trust in the ashes. They hold what time forgets. The words had not been threatening, yet they clung to her, as though there was more to them than a simple blessing. Somewhere far ahead, a soft, steady hum began to rise, so faint at first that she thought it was the wind, but soon it took shape into something more deliberate. It was music, low and smooth, carried on the air, threaded with tones that seemed older than the trees themselves. She followed it. The path broadened gradually until she found herself at the edge of a clearing. In the center stood a pavilion, delicate yet grand, its canopy made from a gossamer fabric that shimmered as though woven from moonlight. Beneath it, dozens of lanterns swayed gently, their light pooling in warm, golden patches across the frost-covered ground. Figures moved slowly within the pavilion. They were dressed in gowns and coats that shimmered faintly with every motion. Yet it was their masks that caught her attention, each one shaped of glass, clear as water, catching the lantern glow in intricate refractions. Some resembled the faces of animals, foxes, owls, wolves. Others were pure ornament, swirling with crystalline patterns. The masks made their wearers strange and distant, their expressions unreadable. A man in a stag's mask noticed her and inclined his head in silent welcome. The air here felt warmer, touched by the hum of quiet conversation and the gentle shuffle of feet. The music was richer now, a slow, lilting tune played on strings and soft drums. Cinderella stepped forward, unsure if she was intruding or expected. No one stopped her. The masked figures continued to drift between one another in pairs and small groups, their voices low and their laughter, when it came, like wind through glass. A woman in a mask shaped like a raven's face glided toward her. The feathers carved into the glass seemed to ripple with each tilt of her head. "You've come far," the woman said softly. Her voice was clear, but each word seemed to echo faintly, as though she spoke in a room far larger than the clearing. Cinderella hesitated. "I followed the music." "And the music follows the ashes," the woman replied, her gaze lowering briefly to the basin. "The masquerade awaits you." "But not yet." Cinderella glanced around. "What is this place?" The raven-masked woman only smiled, a slow curve of the lips that didn't quite touch her eyes. "A mirror for those who walk between. Here, the masks speak more truth than the faces beneath them." With that, he gestured toward a table near the pavilion's edge. Upon it lay a series of masks, each crafted of glass but tinted faintly with color. Amber, pale blue, a soft green like frozen moss. Each mask caught the light differently, throwing fragments of color onto the snow. Cinderella approached. The masks seemed to hum quietly, as though in conversation with one another. Her hand drifted over them, feeling a faint warmth radiating from their surfaces. Without knowing why, she reached for one shaped like a moth's wings, delicate and almost weightless in her hands. The glass was tinted with the soft blush of dawn. When she placed it over her face, the world shifted. The light of the lanterns grew brighter, but the clearing itself deepened into shadow. The masked figures around her seemed taller now, their outlines blurred with faint glimmers, as if each were made of both flesh and memory. The music wove through her like a second heartbeat. The raven-masked woman was still before her, though her mask now glowed faintly from within. "You see more clearly now," she murmured, "but you must tread carefully. The masquerade shows what is hidden, and once seen, it cannot be unseen." Cinderella nodded slowly. She felt no fear, only a heightened awareness, as though the night itself had leaned in to watch her. The music changed then, swelling slightly, and the masked guests began to drift toward the far side of the clearing. Beyond the pavilion, a path lit by lanterns wound away into the trees. The raven-masked woman tilted her head. "It is time to walk with them." Cinderella followed the procession, her steps slow and steady. Each lantern along the path was carved from ice, and within each flickered a flame that burned blue and silent. The path curved gently until it opened into a second clearing. At the center stood a single mirror. It was taller than any person there, framed in black wood carved with curling vines and thorns. The glass of the mirror was not smooth. Instead, it rippled faintly, as though it were made of liquid. One by one, the masked guests stepped before it. Some lingered only a moment, while others stood for long minutes, their stillness filled with weight. When they turned away, Cinderella thought she saw faint traces of light still clinging to them, but she could not be certain. When it was her turn, she stepped forward. The rippling surface of the mirror settled, and an image began to form. It was herself, not as she stood now, but in fragments. One moment, she wore the cinder-stained rags of home. The next, she was dressed in a gown of silver threads, her hair woven with frost. Behind her, shadows stretched tall, their shapes shifting too quickly to name. The reflection reached out toward her. She flinched, but did not step back. The mothwing mask seemed to hold her steady, its faint warmth grounding her. The reflection's fingers touched the inside of the glass. The surface rippled again, and for the briefest moment, Cinderella felt the cool press of glass against her palm. and something beneath it, moving. Then, the image shattered into light, and the mirror was once again nothing more than a rippling surface. A bell rang softly through the clearing. The masked guests began to drift away, some vanishing into the trees, others as melting into the shadows at the pavilion's edge. The raven-masked woman appeared at Cinderella's side. "You have seen. That is enough for tonight." The moth-wing mask seemed reluctant to leave her face, but when she lifted it away, the forest returned to its softer, more familiar shadows. The lanterns glowed golden again, and the mirror now stood quiet and still, as though it had never moved. Cinderella's heart beat slow and steady. She didn't yet understand what she had seen, only that it would not leave her. The raven-masked woman inclined her head once more. "The masquerade is but one door. There are others." And then she was gone, leaving Cinderella alone beneath the quiet lanterns, the frost crunching softly under her feet as she turned back toward the path. The carriage rolled through the sleeping forest, wheels whispering against the frostbitten earth. The horses' hooves fell in slow, deliberate rhythm, each beat sounding like a soft drum somewhere deep in the ground. Inside, Cinderella sat quietly, the dim interior lit only by the pale spill of moonlight through the small window. She kept her hands folded in her lap, the basin of silver ashes cradled beside her, its faint glow the only warmth in the cold stillness. The silent coachman sat outside, motionless except for the subtle movement of his hands upon the reins. From within, she could see only the outline of his back and the brim of his dark hat, but she could feel his presence in the air, steady, almost ceremonial. Once the wind caught the edge of his cloak and lifted it slightly, revealing the curve of something beneath. Not cloth, but polished wood and faint etchings, like runes carved long ago. A shiver traced down her spine, but the movement of the carriage never faltered. The road ahead narrowed, hemmed in by tall black trees whose branches bent low over the path. Here, the moonlight could not fully reach, and the darkness felt thick enough to touch. She leaned closer to the window, her breath making a faint cloud against the cold glass. Shapes seemed to flicker at the edges of the trees, figures that might have been shadows or might have been watching, but they never moved forward, and the carriage did not slow. The rhythm of the horses and the soft hum of the wheels became hypnotic. Every so often, she thought she could hear faint murmurs in the air, like fragments of conversation from a long-forgotten feast. At last, the road widened into a clearing. A thin mist swirled along the ground, curling around the carriage wheels. The trees parted to reveal a narrow bridge of pale stone, arching over a stream that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. As they crossed, Cinderella glanced over the side. The water was dark and smooth, yet within it moved strange wavering lights, each one drifting slowly as if carried by an invisible current. She thought she saw the outline of faces in the glow, serene, almost smiling, before the carriage rolled past and the vision faded. On the far side, the forest changed. The trees here were taller, their bark pale as bone, and the wind through their branches made a sound almost like distant singing. Still, the silent coachman did not turn or speak. His presence was as fixed as the stars above, guiding her toward a place she could not yet see. The journey seemed both endless and without urgency, as if time itself had been folded around them, keeping them in this stretch of night until they reached their destination. Cinderella sat back in her seat, her gaze drawn again to the basin of ashes beside her. The patterns inside were shifting, almost imperceptibly, forming new lines and shapes that whispered of paths yet to be walked. The forest deepened around them, and somewhere ahead, a faint glimmer of lantern light appeared, swaying gently in the dark. The lantern light ahead grew steadily brighter, though its source remained hidden behind the dark trunks. It swayed with a measured rhythm, as if carried by a hand that knew exactly where to place each step. The horses slowed without a word from the silent coachman, their hooves muffled now by a carpet of damp moss. The air thickened with a scent she could not name, not unpleasant, but heavy, as though it had been steeped in memory. At last, the carriage emerged into another clearing, smaller than the last. The lantern was there, hanging from the crooked arm of a tall iron post. Beneath it stood a figure cloaked entirely in gray, their face hidden behind a veil of fine netting. They didn't move as the carriage drew closer, but the lantern seemed to brighten, casting pale gold over the frost-silvered grass. The silent coachman reined in the horses. The carriage came to a stop beside the figure, who remained silent for a long moment, as if listening to something only they could hear. Then, in a voice quiet enough to seem part of the wind, they spoke. "She carries it?" The silent coachman gave the smallest nod. The figure's head tilted, the lantern light glinting faintly off the veil. "It has been too long." No more words passed between them. The figure stepped back, and with a subtle flick of the reins, the silent coachman urged the horses forward once more. Cinderella kept her gaze fixed on the lantern until it was swallowed by the trees. Something about its glow clung to her vision, lingering in the space between blinks. The path narrowed again, but now the trees leaned back as though making room for their passage. In the far distance, she thought she could see the faint outline of towers, pale and sharp against the deep velvet of the sky. Her heart gave a small, involuntary beat of recognition. She could not say why. The silent coachman drove on, his silhouette perfectly still against the slow sweep of the landscape. Each time she looked at him, she thought she could make out the faintest seam at the edge of his neck, as though his head and body had been joined long ago in some careful, deliberate act. Time became difficult to measure. The sky did not change, yet the air grew sharper, the cold more precise. And then, without warning, they came upon the gates. They were taller than any she had seen, made of wrought iron in patterns too intricate to follow. The designs seemed to shift when she looked away, as if they were a language meant to be read only at the edge of sight. The gates opened soundlessly at their approach. Beyond them stretched a wide courtyard paved in pale stone, each slab veined with silver. Pools of water lay between the stones, their surfaces so still they might have been glass. At the far end, the towers rose, not quite like a castle, but not unlike one either. Their shapes were strange, leaning ever so slightly toward one another, as though in silent conversation. The horses stopped before the steps. The silent coachman descended from his seat, his movements slow and precise. For the first time, she saw his face, or rather, the smooth curve of carved wood where a face might have been, with faint lines suggesting eyes closed in permanent rest. He opened the carriage door with a gesture that felt almost like an invitation. Cinderella stepped down, the basin of ashes balanced carefully in her arms. The silent coachman inclined his head, not quite a bow, but something close, and turned to lead her toward the great doors. They opened before she could touch them, revealing a hall bathed in the same pale light she had seen in the stream. She crossed the threshold, and the doors closed behind her with a sound like the settling of deep earth. The hall stretched farther than seemed possible. Its floor was polished to such a high sheen that it reflected the vaulted ceiling above, a ceiling painted with constellations she did not recognize, each star traced with threads of silver leaf. Along the walls stood tall figures, unmoving, draped in robes of muted colors. At first, she thought they were statues, but as she passed, one inclined their head the slightest fraction, as though acknowledging her presence without drawing attention to it. The air was cool and still, and every sound, the faint whisper of her steps, the gentle shift of the basin in her arms, seemed amplified in the quiet. At the far end of the hall, a staircase split into two sweeping curves, each leading upward toward shadowed balconies. Between them stood a single chair, carved from pale stone, and upon it sat a woman clothed in gray silk. Her face was neither young nor old, her eyes, dark as deep water, fixed on Cinderella with an intensity that made her want to lower her gaze. "You've brought it," the woman said, her voice a low, even tone. Cinderella looked down at the basin, uncertain whether to speak or simply to step forward. "Come," the woman said. She obeyed, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. When she reached the base of the chair, the woman leaned forward and touched the rim of the basin with one hand. Her fingers were long and pale, and for a moment, Cinderella thought she could see fine grains of ash clinging to them. "Many have carried this before you," the woman said, her gaze never leaving the ashes, "but few have brought it here unspilled." Cinderella did not know what answer was expected. The woman's eyes lifted to hers. "You will leave it here, and then you will wait." She set the basin down upon the smooth stone floor. It seemed to grow heavier as she let go, as though the weight had been waiting for release. The woman in gray stood, her movement fluid and unhurried. She stepped around the basin, examining it from every side. Then she knelt and placed both hands into the ashes. The gesture was deliberate, almost reverent. She sifted the ashes slowly, letting them slip between her fingers. And as they fell, they seemed to catch the faintest glimmer of light. Cinderella watched in silence. Finally, the woman rose. "It is enough," she said, as if to herself. She turned toward the staircase, and without looking back, began to ascend the left curve. Halfway up, she paused. "The silent coachman will return when the hour changes," she said. "Until then, you are not to leave this hall." And then she was gone, her steps soundless upon the stone. The tall figures along the walls remained still, but Cinderella felt their presence more keenly now. Not threatening, but attentive, as though they were witnesses to something she could not yet name. She sat upon the lowest step, folding her hands in her lap. The silence was deep, but not empty. Somewhere far above, she thought she could hear the faint hum of a single note, sustained without end. Time passed, or perhaps it only seemed to. The constellations on the ceiling seemed to shift, their silver lines bending ever so slightly, as if drawing a shape she had not yet learned to recognize. When the change came, it was subtle. The air seemed to draw in, as though the entire hall were holding its breath. The faint hum she had been hearing faded into nothing, replaced by a sound so soft it could have been imagined: the slow roll of wheels over distant stone. The tall figures along the walls lowered their heads in unison. From the far end of the hall, the great doors began to open. The motion was silent, but the shift of air carried with it the scent of rain and turned earth. Through the widening gap, she saw a shape waiting in the darkness beyond. A carriage, black as ink, its surface dull rather than polished. No lanterns burned on its sides, yet she could see it clearly. The wheels were taller than her shoulder, and their spokes were carved into patterns that seemed to change as her eyes followed them. The horses, if horses they were, stood perfectly still, their manes unmoving despite the draft. Their eyes reflected no light, and she could not see their breath. And on the driver's seat sat the silent coachman. He was dressed in a long coat the color of storm clouds, his hat pulled low so that the upper half of his face was hidden. His hands, gloved in black, rested lightly on the reins, though the horses did not shift. He did not speak. The woman in gray appeared again, descending the left staircase with a slow, deliberate step. She stopped beside Cinderella without looking at her. "It is time," she said. Cinderella stood. The woman gestured toward the carriage. "You will ride until you are told to step down. You will not speak unless you are spoken to. And if the coach stops where there is no road, you will keep your eyes closed until it moves again." Her tone was not unkind, but it left no room for question. Cinderella nodded. The woman's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "Go." She crossed the length of the hall, the sound of her steps swallowed by the vast space. The tall figures watched her pass, their stillness unbroken. At the threshold, she hesitated. The darkness beyond the door was not the darkness of night, but something deeper, the absence of light entirely. And yet, she felt no fear. The silent coachman did not turn his head as she approached, but he shifted the reins in his hands, and the nearest horse moved just enough to open a narrow gap between carriage and door. She stepped inside. The interior was lined in heavy fabric, dark and plain, without window or ornament. The seat was deep, and the air was faintly scented with something she could not name, not sweet, not bitter, but somewhere in between. The door closed without a sound. A moment later, the carriage began to move. The motion was smooth, without the jolts and rattles she had known from farm carts. She could feel the wheels turning beneath her, but the rhythm was slow, almost lulling. Outside, there was no sound of hooves, no clatter of wheels, only the quiet, steady progress forward. She did not know how long they traveled before the first pause. The carriage came to a stop so gently she might have missed it, had she not felt the stillness settle around her. She remembered the woman's words, "If there is no road, keep your eyes closed," and so she closed them. For a moment there was only silence. Then came a sound like cloth being drawn over stone, a long, even stroke. It was followed by another and another, until she realized it was not cloth at all, but something vast moving just beyond the carriage wall. Her hands tightened in her lap. The sound passed. The carriage moved again. She opened her eyes to darkness, the kind that felt vast rather than close. Somewhere ahead, she thought she saw a pinprick of light. But before she could be certain, the carriage turned, and it was gone. The ride continued, unbroken by speech or sight. When the second stop came, she kept her eyes closed again, though this time she felt warmth on her face, as though the sun were shining directly upon her. She heard voices in the distance, speaking in a language she did not know, their tones calm and unhurried. One voice drew closer, pausing just outside the door. She could not tell whether it was speaking to her or to someone else. Then, just as suddenly, it withdrew. The carriage moved on. By the time the third stop came, she had lost all sense of direction or time. This time, the air was sharp and cold, and she could hear the faint crackle of something brittle beneath the wheels. A low, rhythmic sound, like the tide pulling at a shore, echoed faintly in her ears. And then, slowly, the carriage began to ascend. The wind grew harsher the farther they traveled, carrying with it the faint tang of smoke, though no fires burned nearby. Cinderella tightened her cloak, her gaze fixed on the coachman's rigid back. She could see the outline of his hat, tilted just so, as though carved from the same material as his still form. The horses slowed, their hooves sinking into softer ground. The carriage rocked more than before, swaying like a boat on a restless tide. They passed beneath a great arch of intertwined branches, their tips forming the shape of an open jaw. For a moment, Cinderella thought she heard a low groan from the coach itself, the creak of wood, the shift of nails in their sockets. But then it was gone. She pressed her hand against the seat beside her, feeling for warmth. It was cold as stone. "Coachman?" she ventured again, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. The figure did not respond. She decided to peer out the window, pulling aside the thin, frost-stiffened curtain. The forest outside was unlike any she'd seen before, not the friendly woodlands of her childhood walks, nor the tidy gardens near the manor. The trees here were ancient and crooked, their trunks pale as bone, and their leaves a deep, dark green that seemed to swallow what little moonlight touched them. Mist crawled low over the ground, curling like smoke around the roots. Then, through the fog, shapes began to emerge, not trees, figures. They stood at the edge of the path, tall, thin silhouettes in gowns and suits that looked like tattered echoes of ballroom attire. They made no sound, but their heads turned in unison as the carriage passed, tracking its movement with unblinking eyes. Cinderella shivered. The coach slowed further, the horses tossing their heads as though reluctant to go on. Cinderella's fingers itched to lift the curtain again, to see if the silent watchers still stood there. But something deep in her mind warned her not to. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the floor and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. The sound of the wheels changed. No longer the steady crunch of dirt and gravel, now a muffled thump as though rolling across thick fabric. The scent of smoke grew stronger, tinged with something sweet and unfamiliar. And then, at last, the carriage stopped. The coachman did not open the door. He did not even move. The silence pressed in until she could hear her own heartbeat echo in her ears. Slowly, Cinderella reached for the latch herself, her hand trembling. The door swung outward without a creak. She stepped down onto ground that looked like ash but felt soft under her slippers, almost like silk. Ahead lay a gate, wrought iron, shaped into curling patterns that formed no clear image yet hinted at faces in mid-whisper. Beyond it, in the mist, something vast moved. A shadow. Not a person, not a beast, but something that seemed to breathe with the earth itself. The coachman finally turned his head toward her. The movement was slow, deliberate, and when the brim of his hat no longer hid his face, she realized it was not a face at all, only darkness, as if the hollow inside could swallow every light in the world. He raised one gloved hand, palm outward, an invitation, or a warning. Cinderella's breath clouded in the air as she hesitated on the ash-soft ground. The gate loomed before her, its ironwork shifting slightly as though it were breathing. She glanced back at the carriage, hoping for some reassurance from the horses, but they stood unnaturally still, eyes wide, unmoving, their flanks rising and falling too slowly to be real. The coachman remained by the driver's seat, that faceless void fixed on her. His gloved hand still hung in the air, palm forward. The gesture made her think of a doorway being held open, or a line she was not meant to cross. Where have you brought me?" she asked. The words fell flat into the mist, absorbed, as though the air itself refused to echo them. When no answer came, she turned back toward the gate. The ground between her and the iron bars felt longer than it looked. With each step, the fog thickened, curling around her ankles like cold water. The ash underfoot shifted slightly, and now she was sure it was not earth at all. It was a fabric, woven of threads too fine to see, and it pulsed faintly under her steps as if reacting to her presence. She reached the gate. The patterns in the metal swam in her vision, the twisting shapes now unmistakably formed faces. They were pale, hollow-eyed, and their mouths opened and closed in slow, soundless murmurs. One looked startlingly like her mother. Another, like her own reflection, but older. A faint chime rang out, though there was no bell. The gate shuddered and began to part. Beyond lay a road paved with what looked like shards of black glass, glistening as if wet. Trees arched over it, their branches so tightly woven that no sky showed through. The air on the other side was warmer, carrying a scent of burning honey and rain-soaked stone. Her heart thudded painfully, but something deeper, some pull she could not name, urged her forward. She stepped through. The instant she crossed, the air pressed against her like a heavy blanket. The sounds of the forest were gone. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no birds, only a faint, low hum like the vibration of a distant storm. The road wound ahead into shadows, and far down its path she saw a faint golden glow. It pulsed slowly, like the breathing of some great sleeping creature. A whisper brushed her ear. Not from behind, from within. You cannot go back. Cinderella's hands clenched at her sides. She turned. The gate was still there, but the carriage and the coachman were gone. The iron bars slammed shut with a sound like thunder. Cinderella's pulse quickened, but the hum in the air seemed to seep into her bones, slowing her thoughts, making each step feel deliberate, chosen. She followed the black glass road. It wound like a serpent, and the deeper she went, the more the golden glow swelled ahead. The trees whispered without wind. Their bark was smooth, the color of old ivory, and their branches twisted into shapes she dared not focus on too long. Sometimes she thought she saw hands, sometimes faces watching. The road sloped downward, and with each bend, the glow sharpened into form. It was not a lantern. It was a doorway. A tall arch of gold stood freestanding in the middle of the path. No walls, no building, just that impossibly bright frame, spilling light that moved like water. Shapes rippled within, towers bending in strange ways, streets floating above the ground, people who walked but cast no shadows. Her breath caught. The sight was beautiful, but it was wrong in a way she could feel in her teeth. She took a step closer. The hum deepened. Her vision wavered. She was not sure if she was standing or already inside the light. A warmth brushed her cheeks, and in it she thought she heard her own name. Not Cinderella, but her birth name, the one her mother had spoken only when she was very small. A single figure stepped from the glow. It wore the livery of a royal servant, but its face was wrapped in thin golden cloth, featureless. The fabric moved as if there were something breathing beneath. "Your place is ready," it said, though the voice was inside her head. Cinderella took another step forward. The warmth pulled her like a tide. She didn't notice the faint, rhythmic click of hooves behind her. The silent coachman had followed. The evening of the third ball arrived like a slow breath, the sky heavy with clouds that muted the stars to faint whispers of light. The manor was quiet, but beneath the surface, a tension wound tight like the delicate threads of a spider's web. Cinderella sat by the window, the silver slipper resting on a velvet cushion before her. She traced its curves with tender fingers, feeling the coolness of moonlight woven into its very fibers. Tonight, everything would change. A soft knock came at the door. It was the silent coachman. He stood silently, his hat tilted low, the faintest shimmer of carved wood showing beneath his gloves. Without a word, he extended his hand. She took it, and together they stepped into the night. The garden was bathed in mist, soft and swirling. The golden lanterns that lined the path flickered like distant stars, guiding them toward the grand ballroom once more. Inside, the guests moved like shadows, their faces blurred and shifting, the music a distant echo of forgotten dreams. At the center of the room stood the prince, waiting with a smile that was both warm and strange. Cinderella's steps were light, her heart steady as the silent coachman led her to the dance floor. As the music swelled, they began to move together, a dance that seemed to echo through time itself. The guests faded into the background, the walls dissolving into shimmering light. With each turn and step, the world around them shifted. Memories mingled with dreams, and the past and future blurred into a single, endless moment. The prince's gaze held hers, deep and unwavering, and for the first time, she saw not just a boy, but a reflection of her own soul, fractured, luminous, and whole. The final note hung in the air like a whispered promise, and the ballroom faded completely, leaving only the two of them, dancing beneath a sky of infinite stars. When the music ended, the silent coachman bowed and vanished into the shadows, leaving Cinderella and the prince alone in the quiet night. She slipped the silver slipper onto her foot, feeling its warmth spread through her like a secret. Together, they walked into the dawn, the mystery of the night behind them, and a new story beginning with the first light. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to join me for more calming stories, please subscribe and let your nights be filled with peaceful dreams. Good night.